Hello, and welcome to Penglis Online News. This is news from a conservative perspective. Any adherence to objectivity is purely coincidental. And now the news. This edition of Penglis Online News is a special report on the Second Amendment. There are complex ideas and concepts that will be new to you. You do not have to watch this broadcast all at once. Please take it a section at a time and think about everything you are being exposed to and how it changes, modifies, or improves your perspective and knowledge of the Second Amendment and what is happening to it today. This is a critical time for the Second Amendment and for the civil rights of gun owners, because once again, the radical leftist Obama administration, liberal Democrat legislators, and their willing conspirators in the media are exploiting a tragedy. In this case, the vicious murder of children at Sandy Hook, to disguise their real agenda of eviscerating the Second Amendment and banning ever more categories of firearms and their components in a gradual campaign to end the right to own guns and the ability to purchase them. It is truly sick that the radical left waits until children die tragically before ramming home their unrelated and unconnected gun ban agenda they have wanted all along. That exact agenda existed the day before Sandy Hook, but the left did not have the honesty or integrity to broadcast it. So they wait, like predators, in the shadows, until just the right tragedy occurs, and then ever so predictably, the gun ban agenda comes out, and it's all over the leftist media, which tries to convince the American people that because criminals do horrible things with guns, all gun owners are guilty and responsible, and so the government can take their rights away. This is an often repeated and predictable course of action, and everything about their agenda is illegal, unconstitutional, and a direct attack on our defensive civil rights. The left always goes after the guns, not the people who use them in crimes, however despicable those crimes might be. The only tragedies that matter to the left are the ones that advance the leftist agenda. Benghazi was a tragedy also, but not advancing any leftist cause, it is quickly pushed aside and covered up. So, how did we get this violation and oppression of the Second Amendment? Why do the anti-gun owner, anti-self-defense, professional victim groups think the way they do? Why does logic, facts, rational discussion, constitutional law, founding principles, common sense, and overwhelming evidence have absolutely no effect on these people? Back in 2000, Dr. Sarah Thompson wrote an article called Raging Against Self-Defense. A psychiatrist examines the anti-gun mentality. It was published by Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership on their website. Her article has extensive footnotes. This segment is based on that article. In order to communicate effectively with advocates of victim disarmament, you have to understand them. The primary psychological force behind the anti-gun person are their defense mechanisms. This is where their mistaken beliefs originate that the police can protect everyone. If everyone carried a gun, it would be a bloodbath in the streets. Enlightened people don't own guns, and it's better to be raped than to be rescued by a redneck militia person with a gun. This is the permanent victim mentality. One defense mechanism is projection. This is where a person thinks that if their neighbors were armed, that person would be murdered if one neighbor had a bad day. What a person is really saying is that if they had a gun, they might murder their neighbors with it. Projection is unconsciously projecting one's own unacceptable feelings onto another person or thing as if that person or thing were them. This is how gun phobes can project onto a gun, believing that the gun by itself will murder them. Gunphobe is my word. It is how I define those with an irrational fear of guns. If you expand on the idea of projection, you can see how an entire anti-gun, anti-self-defense movement has grown from a mass of individuals all projecting their own unacceptable violent feelings onto something and someone else. Therefore, to the gunphobe, all guns are murder weapons and all gun owners murderers. In a prophetic observation, Dr. Thompson states how education experts now prohibit children from expressing negative emotions or aggression instead of learning that such emotions are normal, but that destructive behavior needs to be controlled. Is there any connection between the way children are now educated that causes them as adults to express their aggression in illegal or dangerous ways, or in extreme cases turn to mass murder-suicide? Another defense mechanism is denial. Denial is the refusal to accept the reality of a given situation. We live in a dangerous society. Almost everyone at some time is the victim of a criminal or multiple criminals. The police have no legal responsibility or duty to protect anyone, only to serve as a societal deterrent. The courts have ruled on this. Firearms ownership and carrying are the most effective methods for protecting yourself, your family, your neighbors, and for safeguarding public places. Victim disarmament and restrictive gun laws cost lives. Gun confiscation, as prescribed by the gunphobes, nearly always precedes government genocides. All of this is known and exhaustively documented. However, the anti-self-defense movement and leadership refuse to accept any of this. Reaction formation is the mechanism where a person's mind turns an unacceptable feeling or desire into its complete opposite. For example, a person jealous of another may exhibit excessive love and devotion towards them. Also, a person who harbors murderous rage may claim to be a devoted pacifist. This mechanism allows the angry person to avoid dealing with the rage. It allows them to actually harm the people they hate without having to know they hate them. This is compounded when spread over the entire anti-gun movement by hating the gun owner, the gun, and professing a love for the victims, all the while creating an entire nation of victims. It allows the gun-mad movement to actually cause the loss of life by denying the implements of self-defense and still feel morally superior to gun owners. Dr. Thompson states that the common thread of anti-gun people is rage. They can't handle their own feelings of rage, so they use defense mechanisms that enable them to harm others in sociably acceptable ways, without accepting responsibility or guilt, and without having to give up their status as victims or as whole classes of victims. The anti-gun person wrongly perceives others are seeking to harm them, so they advocate the disarmament of ordinary people who have no desire to harm anyone. Gun owners are the targets of professional victim groups because gun owners refuse to be victims and are willing to prevent their victimization with firearms. And now you understand. Keep these theories in mind as you go through my report. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. My source for background and history for this segment is The Right to Keep and Bear Arms, a report of the Subcommittee on the Constitution, Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, February 1982. It is on the Jews for Preservation of Firearms website also. Well-regulated means well-disciplined, well-armed, and capable of acting with military precision to preserve freedom. The militia is the whole people, every able-bodied adult capable of carrying arms. The militia includes everyone, because everyone has a stake in self-preservation of individual, family, neighborhood, and state against all enemies, foreign and domestic, which includes standing armies and tyrannical governments. It was also understood that the people would purchase and maintain private firearms and ammunition, maintain proficiency in them, so that if called upon, could maintain the security of a free state. Citizens and citizen militias are required to own the latest and most advanced firearms so as to be the most effective in the defense of liberty, which means that the semi-automatic rifle, so demonized by the left, is the very weapon most appropriate and required for the well-regulated militia and the well-armed citizen. The National Guard, for example, is not part of the militia, as is the common misconception, but rather is a standing army. It is classified as a select militia, which means professional soldiers paid for their services. Congress has the ability to raise standing armies, which is totally separate from the power to organize and arm the militia. The term free state has always been held to be geographical. For example, Vermont is a free state, as citizens can carry arms without permit or other infringement, as opposed to California, which is a socialist state where most citizens cannot carry a firearm at all. A free state also refers to a free country, meaning the United States. However, what if state also meant a condition, like the state of being hungry, for example, or, for example, a frozen state like ice? If a state of freedom were a condition, a human condition, then the right to bear arms would be universal, not just American. And just as our human rights have transcended nations around the world through our Constitution, could it not be recognized and acted upon that universally the citizens of every country must be able to keep and bear arms to be considered in a free condition or a free state? This makes any effort of the United Nations to infringe on the rights of any citizen anywhere in the world to own and carry firearms an international crime against liberty and humanity. It is a crime against liberty for any government anywhere to infringe or restrict in any way on their own citizens' right to own and carry firearms, thus denying a condition of freedom or a free state. So, what is a right? This is a gift from God, not government, whereby you may act and think independently, without restriction or interference, so long as you don't restrict or harm anyone else's rights. Rights are an action, not an acquisition. You do not have a right to be given anything, such as a good or service, which is why healthcare isn't a right. You, by individual action, exercise a right. That is how it exists. You have a right to own and carry firearms, the modern translation of keep and bear arms. But you do not have a right to be given a gun. That you must earn for yourself. The people always refers to individual people, not groups or organizations. There is no such thing as a collective right. The idea of acting collectively contradicts the definition and purpose of what a right is, which is why there is no collective right to bear arms and why the Second Amendment does not apply to the National Guard or any group unless made up of individual people voluntarily acting together, as in a well-regulated militia. Arms are weapons that fire bullets which can be carried in the arms of the individual, hence the choice of the word arms. The military generally defines arms as individually held infantry soldier weapons of .50 caliber or less. The left likes to accuse Second Amendment supporters of wanting exotic military weapons like nuclear weapons in your backyard. However, such arguments are foolish, absurd, distracting, and have nothing to do with the Second Amendment. To keep and bear arms means to purchase, own, and carry guns. The key to the Second Amendment are the words, shall not be infringed. The fringe is the absolute outside border. So to infringe means to touch the outside boundary in any way. Therefore, if the rights of citizens to purchase, own, and carry firearms is in any way touched at the very outside of the right at its border, then the right has been infringed upon. Understanding this means understanding how much of the Second Amendment has been destroyed and must be restored. There is much confusion between what makes a law regarding firearms constitutional and what infringes and therefore violates the Second Amendment. Laws that are constitutional always cover criminal behavior, action, and intent. Constitutional laws therefore include prohibitions and penalties for crimes ranging from brandishing a firearm to robbery, theft, extortion, assault, murder, and more. Lawful laws regarding guns include any crime against persons or property. These laws in no way infringe upon the Second Amendment because they deal with the use of a firearm in the commission of a crime or because they have been the object of a crime, like being stolen. Unconstitutional laws are any law that infringes on the right to keep and bear, in other words, own and carry, arms. Laws that cover firearm characteristics, such as barrel length, magazine capacity, pistol grips, or any law that restricts the operation, appearance, or function of a firearm from how it was designed are unconstitutional. Any law that restricts or bans particular commercial firearms or blocks access to the market of particular firearms with bogus technicalities like unreasonable safety tests are unconstitutional. Any regulation that blocks the importation of firearms is unconstitutional because it blocks commerce and access to firearms that citizens might want to purchase. Any permit or license required before purchasing and keeping arms, especially at home, are unconstitutional. Those all infringe on the right to keep arms. Any law, regulation, ordinance, or fee that restricts the carrying of firearms, the right to bear arms, where there is no criminal intent, are unconstitutional. Those would include carry permits, especially where they are routinely denied. Any prohibitions or restrictions on the carrying of firearms for self-defense or other lawful purpose are unconstitutional. Registration of arms and gun owners, especially as a prelude to confiscation or other unlawful seizure or restriction, are unconstitutional. Any permit, license, renewal, fee, or other certificate or procedure designed to infringe, burden, or restrict firearms ownership are unconstitutional. The legal principle that makes all these laws unconstitutional, in fact, the entire anti-gun rights agenda unconstitutional, is prior restraint. That is, making a law, regulation, injunction, or other restraint before you do something that would be, or might be, illegal. You cannot arrest, prosecute, or punish people for what they might do. Yet this is what the entire Obama-Feinstein anti-gun group agenda is trying to do and has done before. Part of the leftist agenda is convincing the American public it's just common sense, or reasonable, or for safety. However, rights cannot be superseded by unjust laws, just the opposite in fact. This is why banning or restricting rifles, handguns, ammunition, magazines, or anything else, and doing this to all citizens because of what criminals might do in the future, is clearly illegal. It also means any pre-existing law or regulation based on prior restraint is also unconstitutional and needs to be revoked, abolished, unfunded, and unenforced. There are some gray areas. Many states now have shall issue concealed carry permits. These establish reasonable and consistent criteria whereby citizens can acquire a permit through demonstration of competence with a firearm and also go through a background check. This is generally a vast improvement of a previous system where carry permits were impossible to get and the right to carry was oppressed. As a progressive step towards a no-permit state, where citizens simply exercise the right to carry firearms, this is a good thing. But technically, any permit system, however fair, is still an infringement. Background checks that prevent violent felons, mentally ill, and prohibited persons from acquiring firearms to commit crimes are a good thing. However, such laws cannot be used to register guns and gun owners, especially as a prelude to other unconstitutional infringements, restrictions, or seizures. This is exactly how and why current background checks are being done. There is a better way. Rather than check and register every good citizen who wishes to purchase a gun, a list of prohibited persons could be securely provided to licensed firearms dealers. A simple photo ID check could be made against the prohibited list. If the purchaser isn't on it, they can buy what they want, and no registration or record of the law-abiding citizen or their purchase need ever be recorded. The first way to restore compliance with the Second Amendment is to stop using the language of the socialist lefts. We already have a leftist administration, Senate, and media. The language they use is pure public relations and completely distorts the issues, so the language has to change. The most important thing to realize and talk about is that this is a civil rights struggle, probably the most important civil rights struggle of the new millennium. When Second Amendment rights are oppressed, it affects everyone universally. It doesn't matter the person's color, or age, or gender, or ethnicity, or orientation, or any artificial classification. When the right to keep and bear arms is oppressed, it crosses all boundaries. So let's start talking about this as a universal civil rights struggle. The second thing to remove is the word gun as an adjective to every problem or crime or tragedy. It's not a gun crime, it's a crime. It's not gun violence, it's violence. It's not a gunman, it's a criminal or perpetrator or murderer or mass murderer. Guns are not on the street. Citizens keep their guns locked up or secure on their person if they are living in a place that isn't a rights-oppressed state. There is no such thing as gun control, it's just control. Guns are inanimate objects, so refer to this control as civil rights control every time the other term is used. People are controlled and rights are oppressed. That is what the left means by gun control. The reason the left puts the word gun in front of everything bad is to link the word gun to everything bad. Probably the most misused term is assault weapon. This is a liberal derogatory invention that doesn't describe anything because there is no such thing as an assault weapon. So it can mean any number of things to any number of people. The origin of a similar term that is defined comes from World War II Germany when they built a fully automatic rifle called the Sturmgewehr, which means storm or assault rifle. The left has changed the wording to suit their demonizing purpose and has applied the misnomer assault weapon to any commercially available semi-auto sporting rifle, which our military doesn't even use. This leads to the left's question, why do you need an assault weapon? This isn't a question that is designed for an answer. It is designed to again demonize the gun owner with an already demonized gun. The real question they are asking is, why do you want to be a mass murderer? So this question has to be rephrased. Ask the leftist questioner this. So what you're asking is, what are the common uses for a semi-auto sporting rifle? This question can easily be answered. It isn't threatening or demonizing and gets valuable information exchanged. The other answer is that it's no one's business why anyone wants or needs anything. Neither the government or any person determines individual need. Anyone who asks is probably oriented towards a totalitarian society, and that can be addressed when the question is asked. The way to refer to the semi-auto rifle is with the term freedom rifle. This is because in citizens' hands, these are the firearms most capable of maintaining freedom, which is the very reason a controlling or dictatorial government most wants to demonize, restrict, and eventually ban and confiscate them. They maintain freedom from criminals, especially multiple criminals, like in a looting, natural disaster, or riot situation, and they maintain freedom from oppression by ever more power-grabbing governments because of their superior capability to resist illegal, deadly force. Most freedom rifles come with 30 or more round magazines. Those are not high capacity, they are normal capacity magazines, because that is what normally goes in a freedom rifle. Anything less is an infringed or suppressed magazine. They could also be characterized by the perpetrator of such magazines by calling them Feinstein magazines, referring to the senator who wants to disarm the rifle owner from their gun's normal capacity. The most important principle to emphasize as we restore Second Amendment compliance or are engaging in Second Amendment civil rights debates is defense equality. Defense equality is the principle whereby the citizen is equally or better armed than the criminal, and equally or better armed than the government. This includes firearms of equal or better quality, of equal or better technology, and of equal or better quantity of firearms and ammunition when considering the whole population. Defense equality is critical to a free country or a free state and is required of any well-regulated militia. Anything less than defense equality, and the people become subservient to the criminal class and to the government. The final check on government power is the people. Without defense equality, there can be no check, and there can be no freedom until defense equality is restored. So, the semi-automatic freedom rifle is the minimum necessary implement to restore defense equality. As long as the government maintains a vast arsenal of weapons with the potential to use them against civilians, defense equality becomes vital and must be practiced by the whole citizenry. Ask the government at every opportunity, if you take away the freedom rifle, then what? What is it you want to do that is so terrible? Before you do this thing, you have to remove the final check on your power, the citizen semi-automatic freedom rifle. Because when the guns are gone from the citizens, the government will have a monopoly on all the power, and then they can do anything they want. Penglis Online News is brought to you by The Complete Guide to Flight Instruction, which is my sarcastic and blunt critique of our flight training system and how to fix it. Also, if you want to learn to fly, if you want all the secrets, all the inside information, all the things that will really get you through the flight training system efficiently, quickly, and with all kinds of information you're not going to get from any other source, please consult The Complete Guide to Flight Instruction, available from Amazon.com. Ottoman Turkey, 1915 to 1917. Over 1 million Armenians were killed by their government. Gun laws preceding that included required permits, a government list of gun owners, then a ban on possession. The Soviet Union, between 1929 and 1945, 20 million killed by their government. Preceding gun laws included gun owner licensing, then bans on possession with severe penalties. Nazi Germany and occupied Europe, 20 million Jews, gypsies, and political enemies killed. This was preceded by registration and licensing, stricter handgun laws, and then a ban on possession. Nationalist China, 1927 to 1949, 10 million killed, preceded by a government permit system and then a ban on private gun ownership. Communist China, 1949 to 1976, 20 to 35 million killed. The guns were already gone. Then came the death penalty for being counter-revolutionary or for resistance to any government program. Guatemala, 1960 to 1981, 100 to 200,000 Mayans and political enemies killed, preceded by registration of guns and owners, high license fees, then carrying guns was prohibited, then gun bans and confiscation. Uganda, 1971 to 1979, 300,000 Christians and political enemies killed, preceded by registration of all guns and owners, licenses, then warrantless searches and confiscation. Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, 1975 to 1979, 2 million educated persons and political enemies killed, preceded by licenses for guns, owners, ammunition, and transactions, photo IDs with fingerprints, and then disarmament. Rwanda, 1994, 800,000 Tutsi people killed, preceded by registration of guns, owners, and ammunition. Owners had to justify the need. Concealed guns were illegal, then confiscation. This is from the genocide chart, and it's available on the Jews for the Preservation of Firearms website. If the laws that preceded the various government genocides of the 20th century sound familiar, they should. They are happening here. The Obama-Feinstein anti-gun owner agenda includes a ban on freedom rifles and the regular magazines they carry, universal background checks, national registration for gun buyers, and an alcohol, tobacco, and firearms national database to track the movement and sale of all firearms. If the pattern continues, magazines will be restricted, various guns will be banned, and then, when everyone is in the National Registry, the further banning and confiscations will begin. How many assault weapons does the federal government, including all their agencies and departments, have in their arsenal? How much ammunition is stockpiled? Why does the government need assault weapons? Who do they plan on assaulting? The Blaze website just announced that the Department of Homeland Security is purchasing 7,000 more fully automatic machine guns. These are far more dangerous than the simple semi-auto rifles they want to deny to us. For defense equality, those have to be made available to the general public with the same instruction and training. How many weapons are in the arsenals of all the state police, the local police, the SWAT teams, and the National Guards of every state? Are they not all part of the government? Who would check their power should they all combine forces? That's an amazing amount of government guns on the streets. Wouldn't we all be a lot safer if the government simply gave up their assault weapons and machine guns? How many bullets does it take to shoot a criminal anyway? How do we know how well trained every armed enforcement officer and agent is? Civilian shooters, especially competitors, train constantly. Government personnel qualify a few times a year. And do they all support the unconditional right to own and carry firearms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment? That is the oath they all swear to uphold. Would they use their arms to disarm the civilian population if ordered to do so? Will they fire on the civilian population if ordered to do so? Will they continue to support and enforce ever-expanding gun laws regardless of their illegality? At what point, from initial infringements to government genocide, will those who are charged with enforcing illegal laws say enough is enough, and they will not enforce such laws any further? I looked, but could not find any information on how many guns the federal government has in its arsenal, nor how much ammunition is stored. It is known that almost every federal agency has armed agents, and that many have their own SWAT teams. There are armed law enforcement divisions, including SWAT, in the Departments of State, Education, Energy, Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, Environmental Protection Agency, Health and Human Services, Treasury, Transportation, Veterans Affairs, FEMA, General Services, NASA, Small Business Administration, Labor Department, Post Office, Social Security Administration, Census Bureau, Office of Personnel Management, Bureau of Land Management, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, and more. Even Amtrak has a mobile tactical unit. The greatest number of armed personnel are at Justice and Homeland Security. SWAT teams, from local law enforcement to federal agencies, employ a variety of weapons and equipment, including submachine guns, fully automatic assault rifles, shotguns, sniper rifles, pistols, K-9 units, flashbang and tear gas grenades, battering rams, non-lethal weapons, ballistic shields, body armor and helmets, repelling gear, armored vehicles, and helicopters. The CNS News website reports that the Bureau of Justice Statistics published in June of 2012 that there are 120,000 full-time federal law enforcement officers authorized to carry firearms and make arrests. That's an army. Between 2004 and 2008, the number of armed officers increased by 15,000, a 14% increase. So why is this a concern? Because on July 2nd of 2008, in a Colorado Springs campaign stop, candidate Obama said, quote, "We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded." Unquote. For comparison, there are currently about 1.8 million active-duty military personnel, with about 860,000 in the Reserves and National Guard. The annual military budget approaches $700 billion. The Obama administration has never declared their national security objectives for this civilian security force. Federal agencies and police departments nationwide are being militarized. Federal law enforcement action used to be directed through the FBI. Now, a huge variety of agencies have their own paramilitary forces. Law enforcement at the local level used to be civilian public servants with strict constitutional bounds who are part of the community. Now, local law enforcement is becoming paramilitary raiders like the feds. At all levels, from local to national, a dizzying list of abuses of power is accumulating. Whereas raids by SWAT and other special teams were reserved for the most violent and dangerous criminals and crises, now they are used on a whim by every department that has such a team for the most trivial and inconsequential issues, misdemeanors, minor complaints, and regulation infractions, frequently without formal charges, search warrants, or any perceived limit on the power to search, seize, and detain. They have ceased to operate within constitutional law enforcement limits and have become their own law. So the question has to be asked, are we, the American people, the enemy now? So how did we get here? On the federal level, it started with President Carter, who signed the Inspector General Act in 1978 to create independent offices to root out government waste and fraud. In 2002, President Bush signed the Homeland Security Act, which granted law enforcement powers to inspectors general. Because of Title V, Section 6 of the U.S. Code, these IG offices within government departments operate as separate agencies, all under the direction of the Attorney General, without restrictions and without review by any court. Essentially, they are unaccountable, and there are no punishments for any abuse of power. Local police have also gone through a militarization process. It was helped greatly in 1994 when the Departments of Justice and Defense agreed to transfer federal military technology to local police forces. The Defense Authorization Security Act of 1997 accelerated the transfer of military equipment by massively reducing prices. SWAT teams were then created all over the country. SWAT team operations and federal military raids grow in scope and number every year. It may get worse. Alex Jones of InfoWars reports that since November of 2011, the Department of Homeland Security has purchased 1.6 billion, with a B, billion rounds of ammunition. This is 10 times larger than any purchase in such a short period. For reference, the population of the United States is about 315 million. There is another problem. Along with militarizing all levels of government law enforcement, they have found a way to self-fund. It's called asset forfeiture. This is where any property or cash can be seized by any law enforcement agent based only on a suspicion of those assets being involved in a crime. The intended purpose was to cut into the wealth and property of drug lords. That was expanded to include seizing from anyone. In civil asset forfeiture, no crime need be proved, no search warrant issued, no due process, no presumption of innocence, and individuals have to prove their seized property was not part of a crime to get it back. Those procedures are long and expensive. 42 states, plus the federal government, have asset forfeiture laws. All property and money seized become the property of the seizing agency or department. So the incentive is to seize as much as possible for the largest operating budget. The American Civil Liberties Union reports that in 2008, the Justice Department Asset Forfeiture Fund was over $1 billion. Combine asset forfeiture with the ever-increasing militarization of federal bureaucrats, state and local enforcement, and you begin to see the scope of power abuse. Add to this the fact that guns were illegally seized by law enforcement after Hurricane Katrina, and the clear pattern of arming the government while disarming the people could not be more clear. There are agencies and departments from local to national who enforce laws that violate people's Second Amendment rights all the time. And they would enforce any new laws and regulations from the Obama administration and Congress without question. Government gun rights oppression started in the year 1640, when black Americans in Virginia, whether slave or free, were banned from owning guns. After the Civil War, the Democrat Party passed more oppressive laws denying black Americans their right to guns and enforced this racism through the Ku Klux Klan. The Republican Party, which was formed to end slavery, with the National Rifle Association, have since their founding advocated that black Americans be guaranteed their full rights to keep and bear firearms. During the civil rights struggle, Martin Luther King was denied a gun carry permit in Alabama after his house was firebombed. The Democrat Party keeps guns from black Americans to this day, especially in Democrat-run cities where crime is rampant and the racist victimization of Black Americans continues. Other groups denied their gun owner rights have included Native Americans, Hispanics, European immigrants from the 1800s on, union members, and any group that the government wants to oppress. But before that oppression, they have to take the guns. The fact that the Obama administration and the Democrat Party want to take guns from everyone means that they also want to oppress everyone. The most comprehensive and far-reaching repression of gun owners comes from the 1968 Gun Control Act. According to Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, the source of this law is the 1938 Nazi weapons law. This law was enforced by the Gestapo. The Nazi law provided for classifying guns for sporting purposes. All citizens, in order to purchase firearms, had to register with Nazi officials and have a background check. Nazis, the elite, were exempt from the law. The law gave the government power to decide what kinds of firearms citizens could own, and the power to ban entire classes of weapons. Ammunition was controlled by bureaucrats. ID cards, similar to those carried today by U.S. citizens, started with the Nazi law. The 1938 Nazi law was preceded by a 1928 German law, which was created to curb gang violence. This law forced the national registration of firearms that the Nazis later used to confiscate guns. The Weekly Standard website reports that the new Feinstein gun grab is the Second Amendment in reverse, where, just like the Nazi gun laws, it arms government personnel by exempting them from the legislation that bans rifles for the people. Rights, if not exercised, are meaningless and non-existent. We all have a God-given right to defend ourselves. The Second Amendment guarantees that there will be no government infringement on that right. The reality, however, is that all across the country, the right of owning and carrying firearms is violated all the time. Those laws are not constitutional, but they are enforced by the police, and people are prosecuted and go to jail for nothing more than carrying firearms on their person, in their car, or in extreme firearms repression zones in their house. Here is the ultimate irony on firearms. The best way to protest a repressed right is to exercise it. To do that with guns means carrying guns in defiance of unconstitutional laws. If an individual is found carrying guns for no other purpose than exercising their right to carry guns, depending on where they live, they can be arrested and prosecuted. If an individual refuses to be arrested because they are simply exercising their rights, they could ultimately be shot and killed by the very police who swore an oath to protect the right that the individual is being shot and killed for exercising. This means that all across the country, millions of gun owners who would otherwise exercise their right to carry a gun do not for fear of violating unconstitutional laws and potentially being killed for doing so by police who have chosen to uphold unconstitutional laws. That makes the actions of those police criminal. That is oppression. This oppression not only extends to gun owners, but prospective gun owners, and as such, oppresses every adult in the country. So here's my question. How can Second Amendment supporters exercise their rights in rights-oppressed states and localities without getting shot and killed? If my broadcast service grows and I get a following, I shall go to my county sheriff and ask how I can carry a gun in support of my Second Amendment rights and not get arrested, shot, or killed. Should be an interesting conversation. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. To carry a gun here, you have to get a concealed carry permit. But getting one is up to the discretion of the county sheriff. No one gets a permit here unless you are in government, rich, or politically well-connected. There is no balance of power, no defense equality, the government has a monopoly on guns, except for the criminals, and the people are oppressed. Now is the time, I believe, to interview and audit every law enforcement entity in the country, from local to federal, and get a pledge in writing from leadership and rank-and-file officers whether they will continue to enforce unconstitutional laws that violate the Second Amendment and are therefore operating outside the law and should be removed from their jobs, or whether they will cease to enforce unconstitutional gun laws and allow the exercise of all Second Amendment rights by all citizens, in which case they should be allowed to keep their jobs. The National Rifle Association should conduct this survey nationwide and publish the results. There is something that Congress can do on the federal level to help rid the states and localities of unconstitutional gun laws. That is to withhold federal highway funds from states who are out of compliance with the Second Amendment. Those states most egregious in violating Second Amendment rights include California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and especially New York. There is precedent for withholding federal highway funds to bring about state compliance. In 1984, Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. This required a 10% withholding of federal highway funds from any state that did not raise the minimum drinking age to 21. The Supreme Court ruled in 1987 in South Dakota v. Dole that Congress could attach conditions to the receipt of federal funds. Therefore, there is nothing stopping Second Amendment legislators in Congress from introducing and pushing a highway funds withholding bill for states that abridge any Second Amendment rights. There is nothing holding back the electorate or the Tea Party from insisting this withholding be a condition of going to Congress in the 2014 midterm elections or keeping a seat they already have. This could be the lead campaign of every firearms rights groups in the country. Another thing that constitutional legislators can also do, for all over the country, is reverse the asset forfeiture laws. For example, if a law enforcement department or federal agency is operating outside their authority, if they are using high-tech military weapons for routine law enforcement duties, or are screwing up and using their force without due process, search warrants, or official charges, or are injuring or killing innocent civilians, then those officers and departments should have their own assets seized. And the high-tech weapons and SWAT team equipment should be asset forfeited and the department budgets reduced accordingly. The authority to use military equipment should be revoked, and all law enforcement duties that require the use of firearms be delegated to departments who are using their force appropriately. In the firearms civil rights struggle that is just getting started, much can be learned from the Black American civil rights struggle from the late 50s and early 60s. That struggle successfully resulted in the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. What we need now is the Federal Firearms Civil Rights Act that restores the Second Amendment to its full effect, ensures full compliance nationwide, and revokes all unconstitutional laws and regulations regarding firearms. The Black Civil Rights Campaign started in December 1955 when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white person. What followed was a boycott of the Montgomery bus system, sit-ins at all-white lunch counters, marches, demonstrations, the Freedom Riders, and more. A huge amount can be learned from this civil rights struggle so as to be truly successful in the firearms civil rights campaign to own and carry guns without infringement. According to the Democrat Strategist website, there are 3 components essential to any civil rights campaign. 1. Civil disobedience. 2. Grassroots organizing and voter registration. 3. Boycotts and economic withdrawal. These 3 parts have to be used together as they don't work in isolation. Here's how it works. Civil disobedience, also known as nonviolent direct action, uses dramatic protests that disrupt normal activities and usually violate the law. The idea is to generate public sympathy through the demonstrators' willingness to risk danger, injury, and jail. Next is grassroots organizing. In the South in the 60s, that meant thousands of volunteers holding teach-ins in any building or facility that was available. That was followed by voter registration, and later came Black American candidates for office. Boycotts and economic withdrawal are what Martin Luther King viewed as the most powerful tactic. The bus boycott in Montgomery was also a boycott of all the downtown stores. So, how does this strategy move from ending segregation to ending gun owner discrimination? Consider the language changes I've made throughout this report. For example, from assault weapon to freedom rifle. In segregation, the opposition claimed separate but equal, which was nonsense because it only meant separate. In the same way, the claim of common sense gun restrictions only means gun restrictions. So the first thing is to get the language right and never use the language of the left. For classic civil disobedience, thousands of armed Second Amendment supporters would have to gather in a public place where carrying firearms is prohibited or restricted, carry them anyway, and carry on a very peaceful, non-threatening, very public celebration. To participate would surely mean arrest and jail, and possibly the forfeiture of ever keeping or owning guns again if felony charges are involved. What legal preparations can be made so that an armed Second Amendment event could be held and still be civil, yet disobedient, and not result in a permanent loss of rights? Second Amendment protests and gatherings asserting the right on January 19th included citizens carrying their arms. In the non-oppressed cities of Olympia, Washington, Phoenix, Arizona, Salem, Oregon, and Salt Lake City, Utah, attendees showed up with holstered handguns and carrying rifles. Grassroots organizing is already taking place with the huge increase in NRA memberships. But this is only the beginning. The NRA could host Liberty teach-ins at every school across the country explaining the whole Bill of Rights. Every liberal media outlet could be contacted to correct their misinformation. The latest being that an AR-15 modern sporting rifle was used in the Newtown school massacre when it wasn't. NBC reported this error as documented by the independent journal Review. Social media is being used now to its fullest extent. The advance in technology has totally changed this civil rights struggle. Voter registration, however, offers a new opportunity to advance the right. What would happen if every gun owner left the Democrat Party and became independent? What would happen if every gun owner left the Republican Party if they failed to introduce legislation to repeal the 1968 Gun Control Act and failed to push bills to withhold highway funds from states out of compliance with the Second Amendment? What if millions of gun owners promised to join the NRA if they immediately challenged every law and regulation that infringes on the civil right to own and carry firearms by using the Second Amendment in court, seeking an immediate injunction against all such laws and regulations? Economic boycotts could again be the most effective tactic. Every city that is non-gun friendly could be boycotted, blocking tourism and conventions. Every business that denies gun owners their self-defense rights could be boycotted. Every person and organization that in any way contributes money, talent, time, or contributes in any way to anti-gun owner organizations could be publicized, boycotted, and shunned. What if a national effort were organized to coordinate gun owners and prospective owners into an economic voting bloc? What if money were moved away from Democrat contributing or gun ban supporting financial institutions and were put in gun owner supporting banks, credit cards, and more? According to the University of Connecticut study and Gallup, some 77% of homes in the United States has a gun in it, and there are some 87 million gun owners. That is economic power. Add to that all prospective gun owners, and the numbers are staggering. The Washington Examiner reports that an NRA boycott of the Eastern Sports and Outdoor Show has caused the canceling of the event. Reed Exhibitions, who runs the show, refused to allow AR-15 type rifles to be brought in. The Washington Examiner properly characterizes such weapons as modern sporting rifles. I call them freedom rifles. Federal laws and regulations protecting civil rights continue to evolve, and the agencies and departments charged with protecting civil rights continue to grow. On the FBI website, Federal Civil Rights Statutes page are two laws that could change the whole momentum of the campaign to guarantee the right to keep and bear arms to all citizens. Title 18 U.S.C. Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights. This statute makes it unlawful for two or more persons to conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person of any state, territory, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him or her by the Constitution or the laws of the United States, or because of his or her having exercised the same." Unquote. This law means that the President, the Vice President, the Attorney General, several Democrat senators, including Senator Feinstein, and any other government personnel involved in the current initiative of the Obama administration are engaged in an anti-Second Amendment conspiracy to deprive all citizens of the right to own and carry firearms. This conspiracy also includes governors, state legislators, mayors, and local legislators who have in any way passed laws, regulations, and ordinances that deprive anyone of the free exercise and enjoyment of the Second Amendment. The punishment for violating this federal statute and the rights it protects is a fine and imprisonment up to 10 years. If a death results from this conspiracy, the fines and prison terms are unlimited. Therefore, any civilian deaths that have resulted from being unable to exercise Second Amendment rights because of this conspiracy could bring about unlimited fines and imprisonment. The death penalty may also be invoked. How many citizens, especially women trying to defend themselves against stalkers, have been injured or killed by a deprivation of rights by this conspiracy? How many victims in poorer neighborhoods, particularly minority neighborhoods, where police are stretched thin, have been denied their defense rights and other civil rights by this conspiracy and have suffered injury and death? The second federal statute is Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. This statute makes it a crime for any person acting under color of law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom to willfully deprive or cause to be deprived from any person those rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution and laws of the United States. Unquote. The color of law means law enforcement. This means that any law enforcement officer, agent, bureaucrat, or anyone acting in an enforcement role, if they deprive any citizen by willfully enforcing any infringement of the Second Amendment, are guilty of violating the statute. The punishment for violating this statute includes fines and or imprisonment for a year. If bodily injury results, or if weapons are used or threatened, then fines of up to 10 years prison are applicable. If death results, prison could be for life or be subject to the death penalty. So the question is, how many citizens have been harmed, threatened, injured, and killed by law enforcement during raids, arrests, or other actions at all levels from local to federal where punishments authorized under this statute have not been prosecuted, where in fact no punishment or consequence of any kind was invoked? These two laws taken together should be enough, if enforced, to stop any further anti-Second Amendment legislation, regulation, and enforcement of existing infringement laws. Congressional hearings need to be held documenting both the conspiracy against the Second Amendment and actions under the color of law where laws that violate the Second Amendment have been enforced. This should be enough for an immediate injunction of the 1968 Gun Control Act, now a Conspiracy Act, a revocation of all laws and regulations stemming from it, and the abolishment of all departments and agencies authorized by it. This should also be the beginning of wholesale impeachment of representatives and senators guilty of oppressing the Second Amendment rights of citizens through passing blatantly unconstitutional laws, followed by fines and imprisonment. One of the great weapons in the arsenal of democracy is jury nullification. the Fully Informed Jury Association has a special brochure for Second Amendment infringement laws on their website. Jurors have no idea of their power to judge and nullify unjust laws because judges instruct jurors that they can only rule on the facts in a case. This is nonsense. Jurors were always intended by the founders to be the last check on government power and unjust laws once signed into law. Jurors test the practice of laws once enacted and judge whether they are fair, just, reasonable, and constitutional. The judicial system, however, weeds out any juror who understands this before they ever get on a jury. That has included me. So the trick is to get on the jury without it being known what you know. There are some 20,000 unconstitutional gun laws passed by legislators and signed by executives against their oath of office and enforced by law enforcement against their sworn oath not to. These laws prosecute, seize guns, fine and imprison law-abiding citizens by oppressing, denying, and overruling with deadly force their Second Amendment rights. The people, that's all of us, have a recourse. Jury nullification is the guarantee against the very judicial tyranny that exists today. That tyranny flourishes for now because jurors are uninformed of their power. However, by refusing to convict citizens charged with laws that violate the Second Amendment, those charges can be overturned and the citizen acquitted. What if the NRA partnered with the Fully Informed Jury Association to educate a jury pool of millions of gun owners nationwide who then refuse to convict when a citizen charged with a crime is only exercising their lawful Second Amendment rights? Any and all of those 20,000 infringement laws can be nullified by jurors who find not guilty. The most famous example of a Second Amendment defense by jurors is when a jury refused to convict Bernard Goetz, who defended himself with a firearm on a New York subway against multiple assailants. He was in compliance with the Second Amendment, but was charged with violating various gun laws, which the jury nullified. Earlier in this report, I called for an audit of all law enforcement to go on the record whether they support the Second Amendment or will enforce unconstitutional gun laws. There are wonderful and dedicated law enforcement officers all over the country who support the Second Amendment. They are not the object of this report. The good news is that some sheriffs are already making their declaration of support. The Conservative News Service website reports that 30 out of 33 sheriffs in New Mexico have reaffirmed their oath to support the Second Amendment, not unconstitutional laws. 28 of 29 Utah sheriffs sent a letter to President Obama stating they will not enforce any new unconstitutional gun laws. Oregon sheriffs have done the same. One sheriff in California has written the vice president. Also, Missouri, Texas, and Florida sheriffs are voicing similar opinions. This is a great start, but it is only a start. We need to hear from all law enforcement departments and get it on the public record. In closing, let me say that a people can never be free if they do not control the implements of their freedom. In these times, that means firearms. Rather than be on the defensive, trying to hang on to what is left of the Second Amendment as it gradually erodes, why not fully restore the right? Through changing the language, using the civil rights laws, nullifying unjust laws, and by a bunch of other means, this can be done. Learn about defense equality and demand that it be practiced. The Second Amendment can mean exactly what it says, but we have to make that happen. This special report is a guideline for how to do just that. You've got the knowledge. Now do something with it.